Hey, I'm Chris, and welcome to episode 3 of the Reunion Church podcast. This is Sunday Recaps, where we discuss a couple key points from the previous service for those that missed it, kind of discussing how it may help you live out your Christian faith. And Andrew, I think, session 1 was good, but session 2, we really got into the weeds of what living an ordinary life looks like, what that actually means. And I think overall the group thought, yeah, this was a deeper conversation. This was a lot more introspective. Just get started. What were kind of your initial thoughts from this last Sunday?
I think this last Sunday we covered through a few main takeaways of just failure, the concept of failure, why maybe we're so afraid of failure, and I think that was pretty hard for us to kind of go through. We talked a little bit on some of the concepts of scripturally, like why are we even created, and what did God create us to enjoy, and how that sometimes kind of conflicts inside the church and church world. And I'll use that term quite a bit, of like church world, because when we're in the secular world, we have one thought and the way that we think of things, but then as soon as you step into the church,
Right,
there's a certain way that you're supposed to think things and say things in itself, right? And so,
yeah,
you'll have your own thought and process of, okay, this is church world, and so I have to think and say things this way. So, when you say, enjoying a day in the sun in a normal day, it means one thing, but inside of church world, it means something different.
yeah.
And so we kind of broke down what that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we kind of broke down what that kind of means a little bit, from scripture and what we see from in Genesis and Ecclesiastes. And then we talked about just some ideas of the end goal of like redemption and what we were created for as humans, and kind of sticking in that end goal of like enjoying what we actually created for, and why that's okay. So yeah, we kind of touched on those big three things. We didn't get all the way through this session, so we got a little bit to kind of cover next time too. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty decent conversation, even though we were all sweating. Like, it was so hot. The air conditioning was broken in there. It
was so hot. The air conditioning wasn't working. We met outside because one of us thought that was a good idea, and it kind of was nice for a while, and then it started raining. So it was just like every little
fried chicken, where it was like, oh my gosh, this is so hot. I don't want this right now.
We had fried chicken in 100-degree weather. It was a good idea. It was a really good idea. Our catering team knocked it out of the park.
Thanks, Daniel. Good job, buddy.
Thanks, Daniel. Shout out to Daniel.
Yeah. But whoever got the cold brew though going, that was a good idea.
Yeah.
Appreciate
that was actually a good idea. Yeah. Shout out to
welcome
for that. But I guess just to get things started too, that whole idea of the failure concept. Can you, for a lot of people, when they hear failure, there's a lot of things that come to mind, right? There's failure. You learn things through failure. Failure is a good thing, right? There's that rule of triumph, right? Where it's like the hero's journey. And when you fail, you hit your low point and then you rise back up. And there's other people who are so afraid of failure, they're almost inactive in anything. They don't do anything. They have no motivation to do anything because they've tried and failed so many times. Can you kind of explain the failure concept and, what that kind of means?
Yes. I was going to break my mic. It was starting to spin. Failure concept. So basically, the book kind of opens up where he talks about how he had a mentor, and his mentor was so afraid of being seen as a failure because his mentor basically was feeling burnt out. He was tired. He didn't feel like he could keep on running at this pace, and he needed to step down. But the idea of him stepping down would have meant that he would have been viewed as a failure instead of just being a human.
Yeah.
And the reality is that failure is just part of being human. Like, every one of us will fail, but a lot of times in life, like, we don't like that concept. We want to avoid it. And so the failure concept is this idea that there's something in life that we always feel like we have to be the best at, and we cannot fail at it. And it paralyzes us if we fail at it. And so it's something throughout life that you've always felt you've been extremely good at. And sure, you might have a little bit of setbacks on them, like little steps, but never a massive failure, if you will. And so there's like kind of like three concepts, if you will, like, and three areas in most people's lives that we really focus around, that most people will build their structure of their life around. And number one is going to be work. Like you will build your structure, your concept, everything around work. And you build your trade. You're really, really good at this one skill set. For me and you, it's sales. And so you're really, really good at sales, or you're really, really good at leadership, or you're really, really good at your trade, whatever it might be. And that's who you are. And you've always been good at that. You've always been good at this. You went to college for this, you went to school for this. And over the last 10 years, that's who you are. And yeah, you've had to learn it. And like you said, maybe you've had the hero's journey where you had a little bit of setback here and there, but you've never truly failed at it. But what happens if that field all of a sudden goes away? What happens if you lose that job? You become paralyzed in it, right? The other one comes to your career, or I'm sorry, your activities, if you will, which is, could be like a hobby, could be a sport. After a lot of people after high school, they take on something. They're always semi-athletic. Their physique. They're always able to do something competitive. Their cars, their financial insight. It's their hobbies though. And even though it's not in the same field as their career, they still love their career. Everything about them and their ability is in this field of their sport, if you will.
Yeah.
And if they lose that, or their skill in their art, or their skill, whatever it might be, again, they become almost paralyzed in it, because this is who they've always been, and now they've failed at it. That one's not so common for most people later in life, but usually people right out of high school, after college, that becomes a real issue, especially if you wanted to go really far in baseball, or if you wanted to go really far in football, and all of a sudden there's an injury and you still keep on trying, and you just start losing your physique. You start losing that ability. And then the final one is your ministry, which, if you're a Christian, it's going to be where you serve. It will be your youth ministry. It will be your children's ministry. It will be your ability to preach. It will be whatever your ministry is, or your nonprofit, whatever you're super passionate about that you give yourself to. Those are the three areas that generally we will build somewhat of an identity around. Hey, we're really good at this. We don't generally fail, but when you truly fail, you lose your voice as a pastor. You realize you have to step down because you are burnt out and you don't have the ability to keep on serving at this capacity. Something in life comes in where, family is demanding that you cannot serve, and you don't know how to necessarily serve at that capacity anymore. That's a failure concept that paralyzes you, and you don't know how to act in that. And you're paralyzed. You feel shame if you ever have to talk about it to anyone. And you don't know why you necessarily feel this way, but you hate talking to anyone about it as well. So, and it creates this weird mindset in people where, again, I can't fail in this. I can fail in other things, but in these areas, I cannot fail because I have to be great in them, which we talked about last time. You can't be great. So,
yeah. And I think what was interesting with that conversation is, as we were discussing things and talking about, the types of areas of failure, so activities, ministry, and work, they're all in a way long-term, time contingent, right? So an activity, people go through different phases depending on the point of life that they're in. One hobby might be interesting for a few years, and then people kind of transition out of it and find a new hobby or find a new outlet to express themselves, to have that outlet. And then for work, people have careers, but there's always radical things that happen that you have no control over, and you take a pivot and try something new. For a lot of people, the recent one was the pandemic last year, where a lot of people radically shifted what they were doing for work, whether it was staying in the same industry or shifting industries. So, but I guess for the ministry one, I think a thread that we've all seen as a both a team and as a church as a whole, is that a lot of people in ministry, I think, avoid failure the most, if that makes sense. Like in activities and in work, there's a natural cycle to things where you either get promoted to something new or you find something new. But with ministry, it seems like there's this unnatural urge to maintain a ministry for decades, for hundreds of years, even.
Mhm.
Why is there a difference between ministry versus activities and work? Like what do you think is driving people in ministry?
Well, I think I think it's the idea that we kind of come back to that it, that it's more holy than any of the other activities,
Yeah.
right? That
Mhm.
hey, ministry is more holy than the rest, and it's not. It's not more sacred. It's not like God created these other things for you to do as well and to enjoy and actually do. But ministry is more sacred, and it's the way to fulfill the Great Commission, if you will. But I've seen people get burnt out by that. And so they latch onto this and they feel like, well, God couldn't let this possibly fade out. God couldn't possibly be asking me to step down. Who else is going to do this? Well,
Right.
again, God doesn't need you. You kind of suck overall in general with all
Yeah.
these things. So stop it. Like you just got to let go of that. But it's no more holy and no more sacred than who you are inside of work, than who you are going to the gym. Like that's just as much of a ministry as going anywhere else. So it's this idea that inside the four walls of a church, all of a sudden it's more holy, and it's not. Like it's just going to be as much called for it to step away and to fade away because it is still human. It is still bound by our humanity. So it shouldn't last forever. It is called to have a season to thrive and then also for a season for it to go away. There is no church that has been around for thousands of years. Every church has shut down and died. And if it has been around for hundreds of years, even then, it's usually not very effective for a reason.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's supposed to have its peaks and it's supposed to die out just like everything else that humans create.
Yeah. It's overstayed its welcome. It's outdated itself. Like
No.
in a kind of an ironic way, like a lot of these old school churches that are like tourist traps in a way where people show up and they take pictures of these old cathedrals. Like that's all they do now. They just sell merch and people show up and, take pictures of the beautiful cathedrals, but that's really it. It's just a beautiful building at that point. There's not really any ministry going on. So, yeah, that's definitely an interesting point. I think that urge is kind of weird that, we pursue greatness and we'd think, people, especially like our Bible heroes, like, David and, Jesus and just all of these people that we've read over and over and over again that did these miraculous hero's journey type moments that did great things, we think, or we assume. But actually, we spent some time focusing on one of those people in the book of Ecclesiastes, a book that King Solomon actually wrote, the wisest man in history. Is there a reason that, of all the books in the Bible, Ecclesiastes is so critical to our understanding of how to live an ordinary life?
Yeah. I mean, because if there's a guy that honestly we could kind of look at who had a celebrity status, who had that mindset of like really was a great guy, like who did great things, right? Like he was known throughout the whole world. He was very rich at that time. He had that status, but he writes this book because he comes to the conclusion of like, and a lot of Christians like will read this and they're like, oh, this is just a depressing and sad book. And it's like, no, it's a book on humanity. And if that depresses you, like you might need to rethink humanity itself. Humanity is not very depressing, but it has its seasons, which everyone knows the opening lines of, there's a season, a time to laugh, a time to cry, a time to live, a time to die. And we all know that part, but he just repeats it over and over again. Well, yeah, because this was Solomon who had it all. And he comes back and he's like, yeah, guys, it doesn't matter. Like in the end, Solomon probably realized cool, I've attained it all. I have the celebrity status of the known world. People are going to doubt that I even exist a couple hundred years from now. And people doubt he even exists to this day.
Yeah.
Like people don't even know who he really was. People don't even really know what he really did besides write some of these books. And people doubt some of that. And so it's like, yeah, so it doesn't matter. And that's what he's saying over and over again. He's like, and the main things that he says over and over again, like, hey, what's the point of life? It's to enjoy your work, to enjoy your God, enjoy your wife, enjoy life. Like that was really it. Like eat, enjoy it. You're going to die. And just be okay with that. Like you stop chasing after all the knowledge, stop chasing after all the fame, stop chasing after it. Because Solomon realized that he's like, man, I could chase after all this stuff. I could go after all of it. What does it profit us? It doesn't profit you anything, because we're all human. You're going to die anyways, and your name will be forgotten as it should be, because you are not great. Your name is not to be remembered. Your name is remembered by God alone, and that's all that matters. Your name is not supposed to be remembered by anyone else. And so that's why Ecclesiastes, like some people really don't like reading it, but it reminds you of your humanity, and it's okay because there's a lot of freedom in it now of, oh, hey, there is freedom to go and enjoy life.
There's no pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's okay. Go enjoy your riches. Like it literally tells you, hey, God gave you the riches. Go and enjoy it. It's okay. Are you stressed? Like, oh, how am I going to survive? Like, how do I worry about getting old? He literally says in chapter 5 of like, hey, it's okay. Like, I know you're stressed out about being old. Go spend some money. Feel better about it. Like God gave you the money. Go spend some of it. Feel good about it. Like you worked hard.
Yeah.
And in the church world, we're like, yo, you can't do that. You need to be doing. Like,
no, you can't have a good time.
Yeah. You can't have a nice car. You can't enjoy cars. You can't enjoy hobbies, pastors. And I've had conversations with people like, oh, why does that person have nice stuff? Why do you have nice stuff? Like just because they serve in the church, they're not allowed to, just because we can enjoy life. Yeah. There's this idea of like, oh, like Bethany brought this up. One of our leaders, she brought up of like, there's this idea of persecution is the main thing. And the idea that you need to carry your cross. Right. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, we're all going to be suffering, but it's okay to enjoy life too. Like suffering is not the end goal. Okay. It's okay to enjoy this world.
Right. So, well, and even we think of like the greatest hallmarks of the faith of like, well, all the early church and disciples suffered. Well, yeah, but not 24/7. Like, yeah, they were persecuted, but even nowadays, the underground church in the Middle East and Asia, I can guarantee they have moments of joy. I can guarantee they have moments of,
that they like life,
of God, and enjoying the things of earth, even in spite of how dire the situation is, because they're not thinking moment to moment. They're thinking big picture. And that's what we need to remind ourselves, is that to live an ordinary life is to remember that an ordinary life is just that. It's extraordinary in every moment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We have to look holistically at it, and I remember reading one commentary where someone was talking about the book of Ecclesiastes and how it really describes life is very circular, right? You start at one point, you go through life, and you kind of hit the same beats as everybody else. And that's kind of one of the points that Solomon gets to, is that we're all relatively living the same life. You know, if we're being obedient to the call, we're called to grow up, to learn how to live life. That's like the first 20 years. Then we're called to establish an ordinary life the next 20 years, whether it's having a family or, being successful at work in your community, whatever that looks like. And then the next phase is kind of passing on what you've done to the next person who's learning how to do life. And then the last 20 years, that 60 to 80 range, is where you get ready for the next eternal life, and life just seems to go in that circle. But
yeah, my mentor threw it in like this, where like your 20s is where you're just figuring out life even.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times people in their 20s are like, they have to have life figured out.
Yeah.
And it's just chill, just enjoy it.
Yeah.
You're not going to have it figured out. You don't need to have it all figured out. Right. Failure is rarely fatal. Right. Yeah. And that was what my mentor told me. And then your 30s is where you start actually establishing your life. It's like, okay, now I start getting like some things established, who I am, what I'm doing, my career, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then your 40s, he put it this way. He's like, your 40s is what you've built up in your 30s, where either you start getting established or you blow up. Like the things that you've built up in your soul either work really well or you blow up. And that's where you see people,
Midlife crisis.
Midlife crisis, or people who just become absolute dirt bags and terrible leaders, and all these things. Bitter. And that's essentially what becomes of your 40s and your 50s, is where you start living out what you've kind of built out for your life. So that's essentially what Solomon starts writing out of. Like, even if you don't follow the call, your life repeats the same, whether you want to or not. We're all essentially kind of stuck in the same thing of like, this is the reality. You will die. You will be here. You will live your life. Your riches will be given to someone else. People will forget you. So just enjoy the people that you have around you right now. Don't go to the extreme. Don't go to the extreme of trying to enjoy everything in life and forgetting, your actual call with God, because that's part of the thing that you're supposed to enjoy. Because otherwise you become tired trying to get rich, trying to enjoy all the next things. But also don't be willingly trying to become this martyr for no reason. Like, you'll have your own trials and hardships. Don't be asking for more than what God's already given you on those.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely, man, it's such a tension, because everything in life is pushing us away from that, and is pushing us away from that call to live out the Great Commission. And knowing our audience, Andrew, there's going to be people who are believers. There's going to be people who are unbelievers. And a lot of the stuff we just said with our vocabulary may or not make sense, and one of those terms is the Great Commission, right? When we say the Great Commission, it's like this big, grandiose idea. Can you kind of, pick apart what the Great Commission is to most Americans, and then what the Great Commission actually is, what that actual call to action?
I don't think most people are going to know what grandiose is.
That's true. Yeah.
Grandiose. So
big picture.
Thank you. I went to online Bible college. Okay. I don't need all these other things. So the Great Commission. So I think when we hear the Great Commission, if you've grown up in the church at all, you hear, okay, go therefore make disciples of all nations. Cool. What does that mean? For some, it means, okay, I got to bring people to church. For some, that means, okay, I got to bring people to a Bible study. And that's not what that Great Commission really means. The Great Commission is literally to go into the people groups, into the different ethnic groups, and go and make disciples, or a teacher of a way, baptizing them, teaching them, and showing them. So baptizing them, showing them the submersion of the church culture, what the church world means, teaching them, showing them the way, and then letting them lead the trade itself, showing them, okay, now you go ahead and do this. You go ahead and actually do this. And I think inside a church world, it goes even deeper, because specifically to this, we see the Great Commission and the Great Ambition. And we feel like those are two things that are kind of at head with each other of like, okay, I got the Great Commission. I need to go make disciples, but then I also have my own ambitions and my great ambitions that I need to go after. Okay.
Right.
And we don't see those ever lining up. And we feel like those are two separate things. But when you align with what God has actually called us to do, if you go back to what God has actually called us to in Genesis 1, it's exactly what Ecclesiastes says. Ecclesiastes says to eat, to drink, to have intimacy, and to have intimacy with your God. Okay. And that's exactly what we were created in the Garden of Eden to do: to eat, to drink, to work, to have intimacy with each other, and to have intimacy with our God. And the Great Commission is the same thing of making disciples and redeeming back and showing people what that actually means in actual life. If you are someone that just only focuses on the spiritual side of things and just teaches that, but you don't teach people how to live an ordinary life, number one, no one's going to want to hang around you to be discipled. People are only going to come inside the church walls, hear what you have to say, but they're never going to want to see your actual life, because it sounds boring as junk and you're not relevant to them. Of like, dude, I don't know how to talk to you. All you do is church stuff. And I have a real job. I have a 401k. I have pressures. I have debt. And you don't talk about any of that stuff because you don't know anything about the world itself.
Yeah.
So you got to be someone who's dealing an ordinary life.
Yeah.
You don't have to be anything extreme, but just be an ordinary human.
Yeah.
And the second part is like, well, you're not really doing what God's actually called you to do. He said, be part of this world, cultivate it, work it, redeem it back for what he's actually called you to do. And if you're not doing that, like that's part of the call of the Great Commission of like, hey, God's called you to do this. You have to disciple other people and how to do that too. And if you're not doing it, you're not going to disciple someone on how to do that as well. And so that will line up with your ambitions. Your ambitions, God has put those in you. Like what you enjoy about this world, God's put those in there. You can help your own personal ambitions line up with what God's actually called you to actually do, which is cultivate this culture, work it, do it, enjoy the food and labor of this world. And those things can line up so that you can make disciples in this world, disciples that will actually enjoy being around you, and disciples that will actually listen to what you're having to say because you're cultivating in that culture.
Yeah. I guess just to add to that point, Andrew, is there like, so I think this is kind of high concept stuff, right? You know, our calling and the Great Commission and all that. But I mean, is there like a good example where there's a good example of how this actually looks day to day of you have this big call, this calling on your life, right? To live out the Great Commission in a unique way that God's called you to. But then you also have the mundane that's a part of that calling as well, you know, to enjoy life, to have those different connections and levels of intimacy and belonging. You know, there are a couple of people that shared their examples, but can you think of one that you know of where someone is maintaining the balance of all of these things and, you know, doing that well?
Of anyone's examples that were shared last night? Is that what you're asking? Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's hot. I get it.
So
really hard to think when it's 102 degrees. So like essentially, what is an example that people can look to or think of when they're trying to make all of this work and be obedient to the call, be obedient to the actual Great Commission? Like, what does this actually look like practically for people?
I mean, simply you could look at Paul. I mean, if you want the example, you could look at Paul, but what did Paul do? Paul was a tent maker. Paul lived in the world. Paul did the basic things in this world where he used things in his own life that he was actually working with and discipled people in that, right? He was in the marketplace. He learned the culture. He learned what was kind of going on and did the aspects of that. He had his Roman citizenship and he used that. He wasn't completely blind to what was happening in the culture, in his local culture itself. He understood every place that he went, what was happening locally. That's what he discipled Titus into, hey, know the people locally, know what's actually happening to them, right? So for us today, what does that look like? I mean, you know, for me personally, it's, hey, I have this great call to go and make disciples of all people, and just people who are disenfranchised by the church, people who are generally feel like they are overlooked by the church itself. Those are people that I feel very much called to disciple and to bring alongside. Well, so what do? Do I just invite them to church all the time? And no, I talk to them about the head, heart, and hands of Christian living, right? But I invite them over just for a barbecue. I help them with their resumes because God's given me a gift inside of corporate to be able to help them be able to get noticed inside of jobs, to be able to help them get sales jobs, to be able to help them, you know, I've hired a bunch of different people from the different careers that I've been able to have and stuff, and different spots that I've been able to work inside of that, you know, and how to think through different life itself. You have to have stuff actually going on in life and walking people through with them of like, hey, this is life itself. And I'm doing life with you and I'm showing you, and like, I'll take them to the gym because I enjoy the gym, and people generally will enjoy the gym. If you're a car guy, you might enjoy working on cars. And so you just take them with you where you're at. And that's enjoying life, enjoying just hanging out and doing barbecue. And people will want to hang out with you. And as they see those things, like, you can start making disciples. And that's how you do the Great Commission with your great ambitions. I think like Chris, you probably have a few examples of yourself of like what that actually looks like.
Yeah, for me personally, the call is of course the Great Commission, but within that, for me personally, the call has always been to bridge the gap between people who would not necessarily associate with each other, church people and non-church people, lost and saved. However the divide is, God's just given me a natural ability to, one, communicate in a way where I can speak to both worlds effectively, but then also get them to talk to each other, and I think this podcast is one of those outlets. This was something that I've had actually on my mind for years, because you and a lot of other people were nagging me about it, and now we're doing it. But even creating the blog that I did, I have on my personal blog multiple people that requested, 6 or 7 years ago, hey man, you're really good with the way you communicate and just explaining things in a way that just makes sense. You should write about it. And then that led to creating a blog, that led to this podcast. It's leading to, the video efforts that I've done, going to film school and things like that, learning how to understand culture and how to communicate through visual storytelling and through audio storytelling. So, I think as I put it this way, the more you know God, the more you know yourself. And if you want to understand the Great Commission and the unique call that you have in your life, you have to be very open and transparent with who you are as a person. Everyone has a unique calling and the big Great Commission, but the unique calling is going to take time to develop and to think through and to process, because there's a lot of people who are not like me. They're not good at talking in front of people. They're not good at communicating, and they're not like you, Andrew. Some people hate the gym. That's not their thing.
Right.
Like we know one pastor, Sean, and his whole thing is video games. Like he literally does ministry through video games. And in my mind, I'm like, that sounds really dumb. How does that even like, you should hear when I'm playing video games. It's not Christian. When I'm playing live, like, I'm in the moment, I'm competitive. But for Sean, he's figured out a way to use his gifts to obey the call and the Great Commission at large. So,
well, not even really his gifts. Like, I don't know if you're like, it's what he enjoys though.
Right.
Like, he enjoys doing it. And like, there's no shame in that. Like, for some reason, we've kind of shamed people for like, hey, you enjoy doing this. That's fine. Go enjoy it. Like, there's no shame in that. Like, besides us shaming each other, like, oh, you like to go on hikes in 100-degree weathers and like buy thousands of dollars worth of equipment for a hike that my 3-year-old could do. Cool. Like, but that's me personally shaming you because I don't like it. Like,
right.
Or the 9,000 other things that I don't like because I can't do them very well. So that's
and everybody's going to have their own thing. Everybody's going to have their thing that just works, and it takes time to find that. So
I've probably lost half the interest of people because I said I don't like hiking. So.
Yes, you have. That's literally half the state. But I guess just to wrap up, this session 2 and what we went over. There's something we needed to clarify too with what it means for a calling. And this was something we kind of ended our session on, was the difference between a calling and an offer. Can you kind of break that down? Like what the difference between those two is and why it's actually important to know the difference?
Yeah. And that was kind of interesting, where a lot of us didn't quite know how to answer that I feel like there's a difference, but they kind of sound like they're the same thing, where a calling and an offer, like, is it the same thing? And it was like, no, they're not quite the same thing. An offer is something that is given to you that you can reject at any moment, right? A job offer is not something you have to take.
Yeah.
An offer that I give to you is like, it's just what it is. Like, hey, this is an offer. You can take it or leave it, right?
Yeah.
And you can think of it in a way of like someone positioning something for you. They're like, yeah, I got to weigh it. I got to consider it.
Right.
A calling is something where you sit back and be like, oh no, this is actually what I'm truly called to do.
Yeah.
And it's not something I could take or leave. If I'm called to it, I have to take it. And when it comes to an ordinary life, each of us are called to certain things, specifically in where we're called to in a local area.
Right.
Not all of us are offered a big opportunity to become great. Actually, very few of us, or great, again, great in how we measure greatness, which is wrong. We need to get rid of that definition, right? But there's a calling that each one of us has in our local community, in our local area, to live an ordinary life, to love God, which means where we're at, God has you there for a reason, and it's okay. If you have a relationship with Christ, he has you there, he's in control, and he is growing that relationship with you. You are to love other people, which means there are relationships in your life you are called to, which means if you see a relationship continuously popping up, consider that, listen to that. What is God has called you to that person, then you should cultivate that relationship instead of rejecting it. If that person is continuously coming up in there, pray about it. Okay, God, what are you doing? Like, God has, especially in a local area, God has placed something there for a reason. Cultivate that, work that, because God has called us to a community and intimacy with each other. How can you grow that relationship? What is he doing with it? And then he's called you to cultivate the community for the redemptive work of Christ. So wherever you're at, he has called you not to move on to bigger and greater communities, bigger things and all that stuff. But if you're just in a small town, God's called you to that town. How can you impact that with a redemptive story of Christ? If God has called you into an area that you consider as rough or urban, you need to do something in that area. God has called you to cultivate that, to work it, to be part of it, not to isolate yourself, not to be safe, because a lot of Christians really struggle with that. Like, I need to be somewhere safer. No, like
my kids need to be safe.
Right. Like, no one has been called to safety, or anything comfort like that. Like, you're not called to that. God has called you into that community for a reason. Cultivate, work in the culture and redeem it back for Christ. And getting back in the redemption story, like, there's a whole nother conversation which we can talk about individually and stuff, but there's a work and a call that he's called you to do of, okay, God, what do you want me to do here? How do you want me to reach out to these people? What do you want me to do in this community itself? So you work that, whatever that might be, even though you may not enjoy it, even though you may not love that, it's not an offering to you. That is a call at that point. And so there are certain things those are the three things that you and I are called to, that might be things that we might consider like inconsiderables. It's too mundane for you and I, but you are called. Every one of us is called to those things. It's not,
it's beneath me sort of mentality.
Right. Yeah. Like, you are called to those things, and that's it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been great. I think, as we continue this series and as we go into session 3, we're going to go even further into the book. Sensing Jesus by Zach Eswine is the inspiration for our series An Ordinary Life. And we want to see you guys there every Sunday, 5:30 to 7 during the summer. We're going to be going through this book. It's not necessary that you guys read the book, as we're going to cover key things in it, but we do recommend that you do, buy the book and read it on your own time, and really take time through the book to really meditate through it. It's not meant to be read quickly. We're not asking people to read it quickly. We just want people to read it because we've gotten a lot of benefit out of this book on how to slow down and live an ordinary life and discover the extraordinary things that we've overlooked for so long. So, lastly, before we end, Andrew, what's kind of next for our church this upcoming Sunday? What can people expect from session 3?
Well, so for this coming Sunday, we're doing an open house barbecue at our place for Father's Day and stuff. So, everyone's kind of welcome for that, of coming over, hanging out, having a big old barbecue, and we're going to be
potluck style.
Potluck. Yeah. Southern style. So we'll be doing that. But then when we come back going into lesson 3, we'll be spending a good amount of our time going through is we'll be going into the 3 areas of the areas that we try to call ourselves God specifically. So we'll be going into the first one which is being in all places at all time, and how we want to be into different places more, and how we try to be omnipresent, and the danger of that, and how no, God's called you at a specific place with specific people, and remain with those specific place and specific people.
Yeah.
And you and I were called to these places and people, and at certain times, for a reason, stay there. And there's a reason why we have a hard time being present with people, and why that's so difficult for us in this day and age, because we're always looking for the next thing that we're going to do bigger and better, or the next place. But God's called you to be present right there and then with someone. Be present with them, be present with the current community, be present with that. You're not supposed to be in that next place yet.
Yeah.
What are you doing? So often, well, I don't want to get involved right now because I got this next thing. Well, you're not there yet. Be where you are, where God has called you today. And what are you doing about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good session. We hope you all make it. Sunday, 5:30 to 7. Not this Sunday, we're doing Father's Day. So the Sunday after that, we'll do session 3. This Father's Day, we're just going to do a low-key barbecue like Andrew said. So, just going to be at Andrew's place. Details will be in the DMs. So just DM us and we can shoot you over the address for that barbecue. Is there a specific time, Andrew, for the barbecue? I don't think we mentioned that.
Same time, 5:30.
Yeah. So we'll do the same time, 5:37. Just chill, just hanging out. But
we'll pick back up the 28th at Reunion Coffee House.
Yeah. We'll pick back up at Reunion Coffee House. And one thing before we let you go too is we are going to start doing interviews for the podcast. I'm going to be interviewing a lot of key people in Colorado about Christianity and topics related to it. So if you know anybody who wants to be interviewed, or if you want to nominate somebody because they're too afraid to ask, in the details down below of this video, we're going to put our email as a church. Go ahead and email and nominate that person, and we'll give you a $10 gift card to your preferred thing, Starbucks, Amazon, whatever, because we want to see unique people interviewed and hear their stories and understand.
We don't use the word interviewed. Maybe we just want to have a conversation.
Yeah,
maybe
conversation. Yeah, let's put it that way.
Whatever's less intimidating.
That's much nicer.
Yeah.
Let's have a good conversation. And I think there's a lot of people out there who have great stories that are worth telling and worth sharing.
And they don't even need to be of faith or a particular church or anything like that, right, Chris? Like you're just looking for.
Yeah, like literally one of the people I have lined up is actually a contract worker. So he's not even like in ministry. He just works contract stuff. So go ahead and email us. Let us know who you think would be great to interview, to have that conversation with, hear their story. And we'll see you guys next Sunday.